and foremost, thanks for joining us this morning. This is the first of an RDA webinar series, trying to bring some training and educational resources out to our dealer base, our end user customers, local colleges, corporate customers, as well as any of our reps out in the field as well. So we have the RDA crew here. My name is Adam Morrison. We have Sean Estella, Bill King, Matt Russell, John Davidson, and Tim Wozniak, and I believe we even have Dick Bazergan on the line as well. So we got most of the crew, but most importantly, we have Vanessa Jensen from Shure, who will be presenting about Designer 4.1. But the early part of the presentation, we're going to focus on a brand new product called IMX Room. Before we proceed, I just wanted to again thank everyone. Our hearts go out to everybody during this really challenging time, and we hope everyone's managing to stay healthy and everyone's family is safe at home. So without further ado, this landing slide I feel like kind of hits the mark here, but as the market is evolving, we're trying to actively promote new solutions for conferencing environments, and at ISE this year, Shure announced the release of the IMX Room product. IMX Room is an important product for us because it's one of the first software deployments of a DSP out in the market. So as we go through, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat menu. We're going to keep this more or less a one-way conversation from us to you. And if you do have a comment or a question, please use the chat so that way we can try to be very timely. So great. So without further ado, as we look at the market in the conferencing world, things are definitely shifting quite a bit. Based on some studies that were done very recently, you can see here that the investment in audio is probably at the highest it's been in a very long time. Obviously, conferencing is an integral part of every business. Every educational facility in our neck of the woods is investigating remote learning opportunities as well. So, there's a strong focus on good quality audio for the conferencing environment. But as we're seeing, a lot of the resources are being allocated to kind of the top tier of the pyramid here. So, the executive boardroom spaces in most environments are getting kind of the most resources thrown at it, but we're showing that there's more and more medium and huddle room spaces being deployed in every facility. So, as you go down in investment, usually what goes along with that is audio quality. So in some of the huddle room spaces, they're using maybe a microphone that wasn't designed for rejection, and you can get a lot more room noise out of some of the omnidirectional microphones that are typically used in spaces like that. So what Shure is working on and we'll be talking about today is providing a kind of a lower cost solution that can allow you to provide resources towards better microphones in those environments. And obviously the ease of install is important too. So the more complex the system, the more labor charge and cost that goes along with that too. So here's kind of a snapshot of a modern conference space. You can see we have a touch panel there on the table that's used to control the meeting, allow someone to potentially wirelessly share, connect to a microphone, and connect their laptop to a space like this. In many environments, obviously in the executive world, maybe this is how you would control the room PC that's already in the space. So what we're trying to do and accomplish, and I think this IMX Room product does it really nicely, is leverage some of the IT trends that are happening that are actually taking over the AV world very strongly. So as we're looking at these conference spaces, you'll find more and more that many companies are going to an all-in-one conference PC. So that will be living within the space, that will be hosting the meeting, whether it's potentially a Zoom call, GoToMeeting, WebEx, Teams, any of the popular platforms, that's running on that room PC. So how can we leverage that device that's already in the space and utilize the resources on there? you know, what this can do in many scenarios is eliminate more complex hardware for conferencing. Um, Something along these lines, like a huge rack of gear. A lot of times having an all-in-one room PC can eliminate potentially an expensive third-party DSP, a lot of additional networking gear potentially, certainly wiring, you know, less cabling is needed when you have an all-in-one room PC. So how can we get the same quality audio that comes along with a third-party or any DSP into a room like this and utilize the hardware that's already there? So insert Intellimix room. So as everyone on the call is probably familiar with, and hopefully you are, the Intellimix suite has been a mainstay for sure for a very long time, deriving from the SCM820, SCM810, all the auto mixers of past. So what Shure has done is implemented this onto some of the new products like the P300 conference processor. We've obviously included this on the MXA 910, which hopefully everyone is familiar with. That is now, that auto mixing capability is now on board the MXA 910. So now that that exists, we can start to kind of scale down a little bit on the DSP and provide something that's a little more streamlined, a little more user-friendly. So as you can see at the bottom, we now have a software application, which is IMX Room. So let's talk a little more about this software and what that entails. So Intellimix Room is an extremely powerful DSP that runs on that room PC that we talked about. This allows you to enable multi-channel Shure audio on that room PC. This is obviously a new delivery method as well. So the customer can purchase IMX Room as a license as software, which can really dramatically reduce the cost per room for conference spaces. Sorry, the screen is covering a portion of it, so we'll go ahead and, yeah, and the important thing here is, as we're talking about the price, is to keep in mind that this is not, this is something that's important to allow you to make budget for other things within the space, potentially better microphones like an MXA, potentially better speakers to deliver that audio into the room effectively, etc. So as I mentioned, this can run on a pretty standard Windows 10 room PC. It's compatible with most Windows devices out there. There are specific requirements which are available, which we're happy to provide to you at a later date. But most average room PCs would be able to handle the IMX Room software very nicely. This runs as a Windows service. So what that means is the end user really has no idea it's on the PC and doesn't really access that at all. For the installers and the integrators on the line, you know, the way to control IMX Room is using Designer 4.1, which we will get into very shortly with Vanessa. So we'll talk more about the controls. But as far as the end user is concerned, it's running in the background and doing all the audio processes without them even knowing it's there. So here's a little snapshot. This probably looks very familiar to anyone who's used a P300 before. Think about it as a sort of a software version of a P300. We have EQ, echo cancellation, noise reduction, and auto mixing all on board, automatic gain control. So all of those Intellimix features that everyone knows and loves are found in IMX Room. So again, just to kind of re-emphasize a couple points here, it will definitely streamline deployment. So this can actually be done, you know, through an IT department. They can put this on any of the local devices over the network. So this, in many cases, will eliminate site visits. So, you know, they can roll those out onto the PCs overnight and just update with other Windows updates that they need. And someone can walk into the room the next day and it will be there on the computer. So the fact that you can roll this out in a mass deployment very simply and very quickly is certainly a huge, huge advantage. And we know that many IT managers will be really happy to hear about that and that they have a little bit of control over that conference space. And then obviously one of the biggest things is you can optimize any MXA microphone for use with IMX Room very simply using Designer 4.1. And certainly intelligent presets for different room configurations, that can all be saved within IMX Room as well. So yeah, as you can see here, we can kind of take out, you know, that step between the switch and the computer, which is a third party, or even in this case, a Shure DSP. We can eliminate that now and have that Intellimix running right on that NUC that you can see pictured. And then you can tie in your speakers, a camera, and have that tied to the internet as well, all at the same time. So you can see here, you know, when you have an MXA 910 or a 310, it would be a really simple step to connect that right to the PC. So let's talk pricing. So the average cost per room, you know, as we emphasized in the first slide, is keeping that as low as possible is certainly a good thing, but you still want to deliver, you know, a top quality product and a top quality end result, both on the near end and the far end. So you can see here for a 3-year license for IMX Room, list price on that is $500. So per year, that's $167 per room. That's a really, really solid price point. For the 16 channel, which essentially is doubling, you know, what's available on an 8-channel Intellimix Room or a P300, for a 3-year term is $850. So that's a lot of channels of audio for $283 a year. As you can see here, there is a 5-year term. You know, we can certainly provide specific pricing information to anyone on the call. You can just feel free to reach out to RDA and Vanessa to acquire that. So as a comparison between the Anti-USB, the P300, and the IMX Room, you can see there's a bunch of different kind of scales to the product, but IMX Room is developed to be functional with a soft codec, obviously running on a room PC, you know, having that being a Zoom platform, a Teams platform, that's really the goal. If you need to run with a hardware codec, you know, it's certainly, I think, still applicable to use either our Anti-USB or the P300 in those scenarios. But you can see here, if you want to deploy multiple MXA 910s, we now have a hardware solution with the P300, as well as a software solution with IMX Room. And in terms of the audio ins, outs, certainly very capable. IMX Room has as many as 16 to 24 inputs on the 16-channel version. It has per channel AEC references, which is a big advantage for that product. Easy to optimize with any of the Shure microphones. And then a cool feature is also a post-gate gain, mute, or solo control that allows you to change the pickoff point for the auto mixer, which is really nice. And then certainly lots of direct outputs and audio in out for you. So some of the key takeaways before we get into the designer portion. Obviously, it's optimized to be used with Shure microphones and for rapid, easy deployment of Shure solutions in multiple spaces within a facility. Definitely going to save on labor time and overall cost of the room, with resources being now available for other things within the space. Hopefully some Shure microphones, whether it's MXW, MXA 910 or 310. Broaden the conference offerings and give customers a better end result. And certainly, I think when you're kind of thinking about IMX Room within your own facility, keep in mind that you can position this for a multitude of different products. You know, it could be used with, a multitude of different applications. So it could be used for conferencing, could be used for remote learning spaces. So definitely, you know, room to be creative with it. And certainly this is directly in sync with a lot of the AV and IT trends that are happening out in the market. So great. So at this point, we're going to take a look at the chat menu. I know there's some questions popping up. So why don't we take a peek there?
Hey, Adam, it's Sean. One of the questions that we had was about getting Dante into IMX Room, if you want to just touch on that.
Yep. So using our designer software, you can certainly easily route Shure Dante devices into IMX Room, but it supports either 8 or 16 channels of Dante. So that can be routed through Dante Controller. It shows up there, as well as through Shure Designer if you're implementing Shure products with it.
Great, thanks, Adam. One of the other questions we just received was, are there plans to add mute sync on the IMX Room software to traverse back up to the MXA 910? Maybe Vanessa or Adam?
Maybe Vanessa, if you want to field that one.
Sure. So mute sync is definitely on the roadmap. So stay tuned. We don't have a timeline available yet, but it's definitely something we're looking at providing.
Great.
And then let's see, Dave Henry wanted to know, are there future plans for an enterprise level IMX capabilities? I'm not quite sure what he's asking, but.
There is a mass deployment tool available for IMX Room that sort of simplifies the process if you're looking at managing those larger facilities and deploying, you know, a larger scale number of IMX Room instances.
Yeah, maybe we can get more specifics offline if you know, there's something else you want to go into further detail about. I'm looking at you know, at some of the questions as well. This is not meant to run in conjunction with the P300. This is actually a replacement with the for the P300. So yeah, I saw that Sean answered that, but yeah, just to make sure that was clear. And so looks like Peter was asking about subscription pricing. This will be deployed as a license via subscription. So it'll be a 3-year or a 5-year term. That's the model that's in place right now. And this is very similar to other software products that are implemented in corporate environments. You know, so it's a pretty common, it's more of a CapEx, OpEx type switch here. So we're kind of moving away from buying a piece of hardware to a software license.
Couple other questions, Adam. One was, will this support non-Shure Dante gear?
Yes. Yep. So this is a Dante device. So you can route third-party devices into it. However, you know, we always feel that the best result that you can achieve is typically using it with a Shure MXA product. It's really optimized to handle that. So I wanted to drive that point home that if you're using it with our stuff, it's designed in conjunction with it. So the end result will be, we feel like, you know, better than the sum of the parts. So
I don't know how far we want to get into licensing, but
yeah, pricing and licensing we can handle offline with any of the RDA reps. I feel like that's probably best to talk about specifics and really dive that into detail. And we want to leave plenty of time for Vanessa here too. So I think we covered most of the questions that I can see, Sean, unless, is there anything else that?
The only other one I see, and I think Vanessa kind of covered this, was any roadmap to support larger divide combine room setups.
Yeah, there are presets on board that can be recalled using control strings. So much like a P300 has those presets, and the MXA 910 has presets on board, the IMX Room will also support that. Great. So yeah, without any further questions, we'll just hand it over to Vanessa, and we'll talk more about Designer 4.1, which you'll find is dramatically important, and it's, I feel like, a very valuable tool for everyone using Shure devices. So thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks, Adam. That was great. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. We certainly appreciate your time and hope that you find this valuable. So I'm sharing my screen, which hopefully everyone is seeing, and I just want to walk you through Designer 4.1. So just a quick note, I am using the latest version of Designer, which is 4.1.0, build 3408. So if you were to register to download this is what you would receive. Just before we jump into this, Designer truly is that software tool that's going to tie all of the Shure networked gear together and allow you to deploy this for your conference spaces. This is your homepage in terms of Designer. So if you were to download this, this is exactly what you would see. All of the menu options are really on the left-hand side of the screen here. So you'll see I have projects, and I'll just step through these quickly. We also have templates, which can be used to take designs and utilize them in multiple projects or locations. We have online devices, which will automatically open up a new tab, which gives us the ability to see the devices on our network. I have an event log where I can see necessary information that Designer logs for us. We have the ability to export this log if we need to. And last but not least is the settings tab, where you'll see the network setup area. And this is super important. So you'll see at the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, I have 5 devices online. If I was not seeing those devices online, much like you know, the web device discovery app or the update utility, you would definitely want to come in. So here you have your network setup area, and this is where you would come in to actually select the proper NIC in order to access your Shure devices. So let's jump back to projects. One other quick note, on the upper right-hand corner of my screen, you'll see a help icon. So this question mark will provide you with information that is pertinent to the page that you're currently on. You can also just click help, and you have your full help file. You have the ability to search. You can use the topics on the left-hand side of the screen, and you can also link directly to the online user guide. So help is available should you need it. So the 2 workflows that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how we can use Designer to create system designs and pre-configure our rooms with virtual devices. We will then use Designer to essentially deploy that design to our networked product. Before I get started, just a few notes. If you've used Designer in the past and you're updating to this current version, we recommend exporting all of your projects locally and saving them so that you have them as a resource should they not auto-import automatically. I did not have that issue when I updated, but just a quick note, you can always back up your files to your computer. A few other things in terms of what Designer supports. Designer will support Intellimix Room audio processing software version 1.0.x. So the product that we just talked about in terms of that audio processing software tool does require Designer 4.1. This will also support all of our 4.1.x firmware for MXA 910, MXA 310, P300, and ANI-USB matrix. So really, we're talking about our core meeting room or conference room products. We'll also talk a little bit about the initialization process. So I'm just going to navigate to the online device tab, and you'll see here we have this new notification. We'll talk through that later on, but that is certainly something that is new with the 4.1 firmware and software in Designer. So let's jump into it. Let's get started with creating a new design with some virtual products. So to do so, I'm simply going to navigate to my Projects tab, and I obviously need to open up and begin a new project. So I'm going to just click New, and you'll see I have the ability to either import a project or just simply create a project. So in this design, I'm going to call this Shure's Niles Campus. And you'll see I have a description field, but at this point, I'm just going to click Create. So I've created my first project, and now I need to begin configuring my room. So essentially, whenever Designer refers to locations, we're talking about rooms in this instance. And again, I'm going to navigate to that New button in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. You'll see I can create a location. I can also create a folder. So a folder could be used to organize multiple locations by building number, floor number, so on and so forth. So let's jump into creating a new location. I'll just click Location, and we'll just call this Room 101, and I'm going to click Create. Designer will open up a new window with this particular location. So what you'll see here is you'll see that my room number, my location, room 101, is in the upper left-hand corner of my screen. Also on the right-hand side, under properties, you have your name. You have the ability to adjust your name and add a description should you like to. You'll see in the center of the screen, we have a workspace where we can add devices that we'd like to begin to design with. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have our virtual devices. So for this particular room, this particular location, I want to use IMX Room. So I'm going to use the audio processing software, and I'm simply going to pick this out of the virtual devices and just drop it into my workspace. Designer will always prompt me to select the license, whether it is an 8 or 16 channel license. And I have a 16 channel license, so I'll just click next. So I have a processor. The next step is to add a microphone, and I want the best ceiling microphone. So I'm going to drag in the MX-A910, and you'll see I now have 2 products that I've added to my design. The next step is to select the coverage map tab on the upper left-hand corner of your screen. So I will do that. And at this point, I want to import a conference room image and make certain that I can pre-configure my lobes for my conference room environment. So I'm going to click Add Image, upper left-hand corner, and I'm going to bring in a conference room image. Designer will automatically prompt me to scale this image, and I'm going to use the door frame because I know this is about 3 feet, and I'm going to enter that reference size in the yellow rectangle that pops up. So once I enter that, I have the ability to use the check mark, and Designer will automatically scale my drawing for me. At this point, I'm going to select this little crayon at the top here, and I'm actually just going to open up the workspace so that I can see my full conference room. All right, so at this point, a few things that I just want to mention. So if I select this room on the right-hand side under properties, you'll see we have a length and width that Designer has created based on that scaled door frame. We also have the ability to adjust our ceiling height. Keep in mind, this is the ceiling height of your workspace, not your device. So if I want to increase this to 10 feet, I can type 10 and hit enter. The next step would be to drag in my MX-A910 into the workspace. So at this point, we don't want to overload our conference space. So we're going to remove a few of the lobes. And I can select the lobes, hit the delete key, or I can use this trash can on the upper left-hand side of your screen. Next step is just to work with the lobes like we do typically, and we'll simply drag and drop them around. All right, so at this point, that's enough to be dangerous. I have a few notes that I'd also like to mention here. On the right-hand side of the screen, we also have device properties. So you'll see that I have the ability to adjust my device height. So Designer defaults at 9 feet. So let's increase this to 10 feet. And you'll also see I have the ability to adjust the rotation of my array. So if I'd like to type 180 in this field, or use the plus and minus keys, I can do that. I can also hold the shift key on my keyboard and simply rotate the array until it's at the desired rotation angle. Last but not least on this tab is for me to come over to the properties and adjust the name of my device. So I'm going to actually open this up and change the name to Room 101. And hit enter to save the name of my device. One note, if you had a larger conference room environment and you found that you may need a second 910 in this space, you can always drag in a virtual device from the virtual devices pane on the left-hand side and drop it into your workspace. I'm just going to delete that with a trash can at this point, and that will remove it. But keep in mind, you can always increase the number of MX-A910s in your conference space. The next step is to move to the signal flow tab at the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And you'll see on the signal flow tab, I have my 2 Shure devices that I've added to my project. At this point, I'm going to use the auto route feature, which is on the upper left-hand side of the screen, to route the audio between my microphone and my processor. Designer will prompt me to select my microphone, which I'll do by just clicking that once, and my processor. As soon as I do that, I have the access to use this route button, which is in this big white box in the center of the screen. So I'm just going to click route, and Designer really quickly has made routes from channels 1 through 8 of my array to my Intellimix room instance. One important note, anytime you're using IMX room or P300 or any processor with the MXA910, Shure recommends utilizing the AEC reference in to optimize your autofocus performance. So I'm going to make that route manually, and I'm simply going to drag this over from the output of my processor. So at this point, we've routed our audio between our devices. The next step is to optimize our audio. So you'll see next to auto route, we have the optimize button, and I'm simply going to click this. And I'm going to open up this list of changed settings. So this just links you to the help file, where you'll see on the right-hand side, we have Intellimix room with MXA910. So when I click optimize, Designer will automatically put my processor in the best spot for it to work with the MXA910. So it's going to make adjustments to the EQ and gain of these devices. And you'll see all of these settings in the help file. So I could manually type them in, but because we don't have a lot of time today and I want to get started, I'm going to close out of here and I'm going to let Designer optimize my audio for me. So this is just a better starting point for me to begin configuring and kind of deploying this solution in my conference room. So I'll just click configure, and Designer has really quickly optimized our audio for us. The last step, just because I like consistency, is I'm going to change the name of my IMX room over here on the right-hand side of the screen. And once I've done that, my design with virtual devices is complete. So I have routed my audio, optimized my audio on this tab. Moving back to our coverage map tab, we've brought in the layout of our conference room. We had added our MXA910, made some adjustments to the lobes. We've also adjusted the height and the rotation of our array, as well as the height of our conference room. And at this point, we can close out of this design. So we're finished with this virtual design of our product. Again, we're still in Designer. We're still working with Room 101. One thing I want to do before I begin deploying this to online devices is I'm actually going to open up Shure's update utility and make sure that all of my Shure gear is up to date. The next step is we're going to talk through the initialize process. So you'll see Designers prompting me to initialize my devices. So all of these devices need to have a handshake with Designer in order to be opened up and be working within Designer. To highlight this, I'm simply going to open up the P300 browser on Microsoft Edge, which is just a standard browser. And I want you to note that you'll see that same message here. So the GUI, the browser GUI that you've known from the past, will also prompt you to either set up a password or to continue without a password. So again, this is that same initialization process that we see in Designer. You can do this here once, or because we're talking about Designer, I'm actually going to return to the Online Devices tab, and we're going to do that workflow through Designer. I'm simply going to select all of the devices in my Online Device tab with the box in the upper left-hand corner in the device box. I'm then just going to click the text that says initialize the devices. And at this point, Designer has initialized these devices. I can begin to work with these devices. You'll see a message at the bottom of the screen that Designer is prompting us to add them to a location and set a password for security. I'm just going to click OK. If I return to my browser and I enter the IP address of my P300, for example, you'll see that I no longer have the warning to initialize. So you just need to do that process once, and then you're able to work with your Shure gear. You'll also see a notification here to use Designer for full configuration. So while you have a number of options here in terms of settings, most importantly maybe is your network setting, you do need to utilize Designer to configure your space. So we're going to return to Designer. And at this point, now that our devices are fully initialized, we're going to begin deploying this gear in our previous design. Before I move forward, I want to make a few quick notes here. You'll see on the screen, we have a little oval here with an add by IP function. If I click this, I can enter any IP address that I'd like and add it to a project. I can also use add from file, and that will allow me to pull in a list of IP addresses that I'd like to add to my online device view. This comes in handy when you're using devices that are on different subnets. You'll see you also have the ability next to add by IP to sort your gear by IP scope. In this instance, it isn't as valuable because we only have 5 devices here. But if you could imagine someone that had hundreds of devices, the ability to sort these devices might come in handy. You'll also see a search field at the top of the screen in the center. I can type in any search term I'd like. I can also use the drop-down arrow on the search field to pick the specific device that I'd like to discover, and then I can filter that list based on whether or not that device has been discovered automatically or if it has been added manually with the add by IP function. So just a few ways that you can sort your online device view and narrow down the gear that you're looking at. So let's move back to our project.
Hey, Vanessa, quickly, can you import IP addresses using a CSV file?
You can, yes.
Okay.
It's a great question. So we're going to return to our project. I'm simply going to open up my Niles campus and my Room 101 location by double clicking both of those. And you'll see we have our design here with our IMX room, our MXA 910. You'll see the coverage map information has been pulled in. And you'll also see that the signal flow, all of that information is saved from which we had just created a few moments ago. So now that I have this design, I'd like to begin deploying my gear that's online into this design. So to do so, I'm going to click live mode, which is right above virtual devices. And you'll see automatically I have a green bar at the top of my screen. You'll also see that I have live mode is indicated with green background, and the virtual devices we saw earlier are now replaced with online devices. So those 5 devices are the devices that my PC has found. In this case, we have some devices in the center workspace that we need to begin associating with our live devices. So to do so, we simply pick the proper device. In this case, I know I need IMX room. And like we did with the virtual devices, we simply select the device and we move it into the design. You'll see how IMX room, that little oval there sort of turns a darker color, indicating that is the proper device for me to drop there. So I wouldn't be able to drop this IMX room on this MXA 910. So at this point, I'm simply going to drop my IMX room live device into my design. And you'll see that all of a sudden, I have a green bar on the left-hand side of this particular box. I'm going to do the same for my MXA 910, and I'm going to drag that live device into my virtual design. A few quick notes about online devices. You'll see I have the ability to identify devices with this click to identify button. So if you had multiples of MXA 910 or any device, you would be able to quickly identify which is the proper device you'd like to bring into this particular project or location.
Vanessa?
Yes.
Sean, we just had a quick question. Can you create virtual devices that are not Shure hardware?
So that's a great question. At this time, no. So it is all, Designer is really for the Shure ecosystem of products that we are talking about today. So again, the MXA 910, MXA 310, and USB P300 and IMX Room are the core devices we're working with in Designer.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So at this point, we have these devices, these live devices in our design. But you'll see on the right-hand side, we have not yet synchronized our design with our online devices. To highlight this, I'm just gonna really quickly double-click the MXA910, and you'll see we have our default template in the user interface here. So we have our 8 lobes, which are designed to cover that 30 by 30 room. For room 101, we know this isn't gonna work, right? We know we need the 5 lobes. So in order to send our design that we created with virtual devices to our online devices, I'm going to select all of these devices, and I'm going to use the synchronize field on the right-hand side of this particular workspace. The drop-down box gives me 2 options. The option that we want to select here is we want to push our design to our devices, which is what I'm going to do. Designer will ask me if I also want to push Dante routes, and I think that's a great idea, so I'm going to click push. And at this point, designer's basically taking the lobe design, audio route information, optimization information that we did previously with virtual devices and sending it to our online devices. So you'll see that's successful. I can click done, and you'll see that we are now synced. Designer will prompt us to add this, to save this design as a preset. We'll dismiss this, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. If I open up the MXA910 again, by double clicking that device, you'll see that I now have the 5 lobes that we created in our design. So we've successfully pushed that design that we really quickly created to our online devices. If we step through coverage map, again, we still have our 5 lobes there. And if we move into signal flow, you'll see a few things. You'll see that we have this green bar at the top of our devices, and we have check marks indicating that Dante audio has been routed. One last step, I'm going to return to the overview tab. And if I open up the user interface for IMX Room by double clicking this, you'll see in just a minute that I have audio flowing on mic input 1 through 5 of my IMX Room. You'll also see a notification that I have not yet licensed my IMX Room. You'll see on the output side, on the right-hand side of the screen, we don't have any audio flowing out of this instance of IMX Room. So we need to license this device. So I'm going to use this Go to License field on the right-hand side of this screen. And Designer's going to allow me to activate my particular instance of Intellimix Room. I'm just going to click next. Designer's going to tell me that I need to access the remote license server in order to license my device, which I know, so I'll click done. And now in order to license, I need to select my instance of IMX Room in the workspace and utilize this activate button. I'm going to pull in my license ID, which I received from Shure when I purchased this, and I'm going to select that I agree to the end user license agreement. And I'm simply going to click activate. Designer will tell me that it's reaching out over the interwebs to establish that connection on a remote computer. And you'll see in just a minute that we will have a successful instance of IMX Room. We will have licensed this fully. We no longer see that warning. And in just a second, you'll see audio will flow on the Dante output side as well. So we have within IMX Room, which I know we talked about earlier, we have our 16 microphone inputs. You'll see we have parametric EQ, we have AEC, noise reduction, AGC, all going into our auto mixer. We also have a block here for parametric EQ and compression, all fed to our matrix mixer. And you'll see that we also have our Dante output channels. You'll see a virtual audio output. And if I just scroll down slightly, sorry, you'll see there's a virtual audio input as well. So if I had joined this meeting with my NUC and also selected Intellimix Room as my microphone and speaker of choice, you would see an audio input coming in from Zoom. You'll see there's also the ability to utilize PC input. So in my case, the headphone input or output on my NUC could be utilized for sending information back and forth with IMX Room. So you'll see I have a few options here to select. I have some adjustments in terms of gain here. And essentially, this is kind of what you would see in terms of the overall interface for IMX Room. So there's a lot of flexibility here. Another option for using maybe the PC output would be if you wanted to utilize the display speakers for your audio conference, you could utilize that. So any peripheral that is part of that particular device, whether or not it's a Nook or some other appliance that is running Windows as an operating service, essentially can be utilized with IMX Room. So at this point, we've essentially finished our design. The last step would be to return to our room and save our configuration as a preset. So I'm just going to save this as our default preset, and Designer will save this preset to all devices in my location. If you had the need to utilize IMX Room in a divisible conference space or an NPR, for example, you still have access to those 10 presets in order to save those configurations in your Shure devices. At this point, I think I'm going to end and open up for any questions.
I saw one that I wanted to address. You mentioned at the beginning, if you're going from an older version of Designer, you should export your presets. Can you just go through how to export presets on a global scale with Designer?
So if you are updating, you would want to export your project file. So if I return to my projects, it's a great note. You'll see I have my Niles campus, which we just created. And if I scroll to the right, the very right of this particular bar, when I've highlighted that project, I have these 3 dots. If I click over here, I have the ability to export my file. So this will simply save this project on my local hard drive, wherever I've pointed Designer to save files. And then from there, I can either email that to Adam, for example, if he's going in to work on that project, or I can simply save that and then bring that back in if if I needed to at some point.
Vanessa, we had another question. On the coverage map, you started out with 8 lobes and you deleted 3 to end up with 5. But then on the signal flow page, there were still 8 signals flowing into IMX Room.
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't that match with what's going on in the coverage map?
So Designer will always just push the maximum channels that each device allows. So with the MXA910, the auto route function is going to assume you're sending 8 discrete channels to your processor. You can come in here and you can actually remove routes if you'd like to. So I can just remove 6, 7, and 8. If I wanted to bring in, for example, an MXA310 to this project and then route audio, you could pretend this is another MXA910 if you'd like. I can then just route audio to those devices as well. So at this point, the limitation is that it will assume that you're using all 8 channels of your MXA910 or all 4 channels of your MXA310.
Okay.
So you may need to make adjustments, but it's really designed to get you going quicker in terms of your overall deployment of your hardware solution.
No problem. Thanks for that, Vanessa.
Thanks, John.
We also had a question about whether or not it's necessary to have Dante Virtual Sound Card if you're deploying IMX Room, as well as Dante Controller. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, so you don't need Dante Virtual Sound Card at all. That sort of service is built into IMX Room. I always have Dante Controller just because I find it handy to be able to verify routes and other things. But it's absolutely not necessary. I should also mention this IMX Room. I am networked to this Shure gear, so I'm actually using my computer connected back to a switch. And the NUC that's running this IMX room is also connected to that switch. The NUC is simply on. As soon as that device is powered up, IMX room boots up and it runs as a service in the background of that device. So there's no need to, once you've configured, do anything in terms of the IMX room instance. It'll automatically boot up and it'll simply run in the background on that particular Windows device.
We have a question here about importing. So on the coverage map page, if you have sort of a custom shaped or odd shaped room, in order to map it, can you pull in a file to make that happen?
So you can bring in images, you can't bring in a PDF, you can bring in a GIF, you can bring in a PNG. As long as you have those devices, you can just simply bring them in as you need to. Hopefully that's clear enough.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I know one thing we've done in the past is use the snipping tool in Windows. So if you haven't, maybe you have a PDF file, you just use that snipping tool to take a screenshot of the image. And even if it's an odd shape, you can move the workspace to accommodate a larger image too. So it doesn't have to be a perfect square shape necessarily. And one thing I think I got a question about was if it's required to have a license to use IMX Room if you want to go into the controls. And the best part about Designer is that you have access to IMX Room without needing a license. So you can go in and look at the audio processes and configure your auto mixer and everything offline before the license is actually purchased. So really when we're talking about, the audio processes of IMX Room, we're really talking about Designer and how you can control it with Designer.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of highlight that, I just moved out of live mode into a virtual mode, and you're seeing, all of the audio path information that you could then kind of work through if you were curious to see, the full capability of IMX Room. You could simply download Designer, and you can work with any of these devices offline. It's a great point, Adam. Thanks.
We have another question here. Can you utilize the USB connection of a soft codec laptop with IMX Room?
As long as it meets the requirements for IMX Room, then yes, you can use that. You would use that as your your PC device. And if I had those devices on this particular NUC, essentially you would have the ability to kind of select that.
Great. Here's an interesting one. Are there any plans for peripherals such as I/O plates for wall or conference table access? And then I guess the second part of that is how will IMX Room react if you use a third-party Dante device?
So the last question I'll address first. Unfortunately, I can't tell you how it will work with a third-party device. All of the testing that we've done has been with our MXA 910 or 310, but it's a Dante workflow in terms of the processor. So it should work. You may need to make some adjustments within some of your settings to match that device, sort of that season to taste component of, all installations and deployments, but, it will work. Again, your mileage may vary. And then in terms of, input output plates and whatnot, we're always looking to kind of advance our products in the future. So, stay tuned. Perhaps, we'll have something, perhaps not, but that certainly is, a great idea. I'll share that with our team.
A couple other questions, Vanessa. We had a question about, will Shure be able to send out a tone before their DSP optimizes the space. Apparently other manufacturers are doing this, literally analyzing the space before putting in generic auto settings.
So at this time, IMX Room doesn't have that capability, but you know, we're always looking to add features to our products. So possibly, stay tuned.
Yeah, more often than not, the automatic settings are really a starting point. You know, just to get the room kind of working properly, and then obviously you can cater it to taste. You know, but I agree, having accounting for the acoustics of the room are important, but a lot of times we recommend just using a headphone amplifier and adjusting the EQ of the MXA 910 to accommodate the space, or 310 or other microphone. There's a couple other ones that are coming in here. We appreciate all the feedback here, guys. This is great. Is it compatible with Dante Domain Manager?
So that would, I mean, this is a Dante device, so I don't see why you couldn't use Dante Domain Manager if you'd like to. I don't have any specific installations at this time that are using that, so we can take that one offline if there's questions specifically about it.
Yeah, sure. And just you know, I don't know if this was mentioned, but IMX Room is a few months away of being deployed out in the wild. So some of these are, you know, obviously great questions, and we'll have more feedback once we start deploying it on a larger scale. And one other question was, how are presets recalled using IMX Room or MXA for that matter? I think it relates to, you know, like a control platform such as QSYS, Crestron, you know, using the API. Can you go into any detail about that?
So all the presets that are saved within Designer can be recalled from, you know, any control protocol system. So.
And I think we have one more. Oh, somebody wanted to see what IMX Room looks like in Dante Controller.
Sure. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, we have the second device here is our IMX Room. We have our microphone inputs, and then we have our Dante inputs as separate separate sources there, or flows. And you'll see in this particular instance, you know, we had routed channels 1 through 5 from our MXA 910 with the auto route capability, and then I deleted channels 6 through 8. So you'll see I also added in 6 through 8 as the MXA 310. Of course, I can, you know, make any changes I need to. There is the possibility, and we didn't really cover this, but you can also use encryption to sort of fence the Dante routes between the devices in your location. And that's a really simple thing that can be added on the online device page within that particular location. You'll see here next to templates, we have the ability to enable this encryption. And that essentially only allows Dante routes to be established with the devices in that location.
All right.
We have time for a couple more.
So Vanessa, should I assume that even though you can't route non-Shure products through Designer, that you can through Dante Controller? You can just route them right in.
Correct. Yep.
Well, I think we're kind of nearing the end. I definitely we're happy to field any questions offline. You know, if anyone wants to get in touch with Vanessa, myself, Bill, Sean, any of the RDA crew, Matt, Russell as well, we're all available for support and help. If you're interested in trying out IMX Room, we can certainly take that offline as well. But I think the best thing for everyone to do is to download Designer. So we can send a follow-up email with some links as resources where you can download it. It's a free program, so you can go ahead and put that on your Windows device and start using it today. So again, we appreciate all your time. We hope everyone stays safe, and most importantly, thank you, Vanessa, for taking us through Designer and IMX Room.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Have a great day.
Great
Thanks,
job.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Much appreciated.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.